This is another edition of our Mic'd Up series. This time we are joined by Fox 8 anchor in New Orleans, Chris Hagan. Chris, thank you so much for joining me.
Always glad to join you, Seth. Whether we're talking real football, fantasy football, college football, I'm always down.
Absolutely. Let's get right to it. Talking about the Saints, they've had a very interesting offseason, even with everything that's been going on. So far, what grade would you give the Saints in their offseason and why?
Yeah, I actually did a grade of NFC South teams, and I gave them a B+ because I like what they did. Obviously, retaining Drew Brees, retaining Taysom Hill, two of their biggest offensive weapons. Obviously, Emmanuel Sanders is a big boost as well. The only reason I didn't maybe give them an A- or an A, they have some work to do at linebacker. I think losing A.J. Klein is more of a key piece than a lot of people realize, just because of the chemistry of that linebacker group and as good of a run stopper as he was, and even a pass rusher at times. He was really good on some of those A-gap blitzes. And so I think they've got work to do there. But I would say this, if Taysom Hill down the road is actually the Saints quarterback of the future, I would, in hindsight, upgrade this to an A, because that means they kept their next franchise quarterback, I guess, in the building as a restricted free agent.
Absolutely. I mean, if Taysom Hill turns out to be what Sean Payton believes he can be as a starting quarterback, we obviously know what he can be as an overall player. But if he turns out to be what he believes as a starting quarterback, well, not only is it probably can get upgraded to an A, but also we're talking about Sean Payton as one of the greatest coaches of all time. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think Peyton's certainly earned one of the best offensive minds title, the play calling title. But yeah, I would take it a step further and say, if he's able to go from this system that he's had with Drew Brees since 2006 and just kind of morph it around Taysom Hill, you obviously have the weapons there. I mean, things are going to have to look a little bit different, but I think Sean Payton's infatuation with Hill tells us that he sees the Saints offense that Taysom can run successfully. He sees an offense that he can build to Taysom Hill's skill set, and doesn't necessarily need that pocket passing quarterback that they've honestly passed on in a lot of drafts and not really gone after like they have in previous drafts. From everything we've seen with Taysom Hill, the fact that Sean Payton, before they made him a restricted free agent, said there's a possibility of locking him up to a long-term deal before free agency started. Now, that didn't happen, but it shows that Payton does see a future with Hill at quarterback.
Taking Drew Brees out of the equation and just considering all of the other signings, you mentioned Emmanuel Sanders, obviously Malcolm Jenkins. We can even throw somebody like retaining an Andrews Pete. What do you think has been the most important signing for the Saints this offseason?
I would say Emmanuel Sanders. I think you got to be able to score, and that's crazy to say about a Saints team, but when you look at the last couple of playoff runs, once they've gotten in the playoffs, points have been harder to come by. That Eagles divisional round game in 2018, not an easy one. They struggled in the red zone. They struggled to score against the Rams in that fateful NFC Championship game, and obviously last season against the Vikings, that defensive line ate them up and really kept them out of the end zone. I think Emmanuel Sanders gives this offense another dynamic. And you mentioned it there too. I think you can't ignore Andrews Pete, keeping that offensive line intact and continuing to build on what they've done over the last few seasons. So offensively, 1A Sanders, 1B Pete. But I think Sanders with his versatility, his ability to play in the slot, gives the Saints a lot of options, and quite frankly should give defenses more guys than they can cover when you talk about Michael Thomas, Jared Cook, and Alvin Kamara alongside him.
It makes it pretty scary to think about what this offense can potentially do now that they have someone of Emmanuel Sanders' skill set even in the frame.
Yeah, I think it takes away it doesn't allow opponents to really predict what you're going to do, because oftentimes by the time you get to the postseason, you've seen a lot of what Kamara does and a lot of ways the Saints use him. We know what Michael Thomas does, and a lot of teams have just gone to doubling him to completely take him out of the game and making the Saints beat them elsewhere. But I'm also a little bit of the belief, and I've talked about it some, but just that the Saints maybe didn't use Jared Cook like they could have in that wild card game against the Vikings. There was clear frustration from him that he didn't get the ball until really later in that contest. And the way that Jared Cook had played toward the end of the regular season, and obviously with Breeze, he was a guy that wherever he lined up, hand in the dirt or out wide, he was making plays. And so, yeah, they need that second receiver, but they really had one in Cook too. So again, I just think the addition of Sanders means this offense puts so much more pressure on guys. And look, I am of the belief that if you have a receiver that you like at 24 in the first round, say a Justin Jefferson, double down, man. Get that receiver that is going to make you an elite offensive unit.
And I think that's a really good transition just into draft talk. You mentioned the Saints and their first round draft pick at 24. For the Saints, what do you see them doing? I know a lot of people had them going for a wide receiver in the first round, but after the signing of Sanders, it kind of seems like they can just go best player available.
Yeah, and that's something the Saints have always done. They haven't really reached, if there's a guy that I would say, if there's a best player available they like in the teens that maybe they want to trade up to get, they go that route and make their move that way. But if they sit at 24, a guy I like would be Patrick Queen for a number of reasons. One, I do think he is a very quality linebacker who would fit alongside Demario Davis well. But two, in a year where you may not get the in-person evaluations and you may not have seen as much as you wanted to of the private workout because of COVID-19 and the travel restrictions, maybe you go with a guy who's local, who you were able to watch more in the regular season, able to see more tape of, and that would be a guy like Patrick Queen, who was right up the road at LSU and played really well.
When you think about this draft, and you actually mentioned it, do you think a team like the Saints maybe has a little bit of an advantage because there's so much talent down the road at LSU? There's so much talent just kind of all around the state in this South region that they may have gotten a little bit of a closer eye to.
I do. I think for those reasons, not to mention, I think the communication was there between like Joe Brady and the Saints coaching staff a lot, and what he saw from LSU players and LSU personnel. I know the Saints have a really good relationship with Ed Ogeron and LSU in general, and so I think there's a sharing of information there. I also think there's guys like Amik Robertson from Louisiana Tech, a cornerback that could be a good mid-round pick, and certainly has a lot of ability. There's a lot of Louisiana guys, as we know, covering high school and college football here that would be a good fit wherever they land. And so when you talk about the pro players per capita and the way Louisiana's near the top of the country in that mark, certainly the Saints have an advantage there because so many guys can't be away from home. Christian Fulton was in Florida training. Now he tells me he's back in New Orleans because he's got to be closer to home. He can't do as much traveling, and he said one of the teams he's talked to is the Saints, amongst others. And so I think these Louisiana guys are more easier to get in contact with and to get tape of, and to maybe set up some sort of workout with, even if it's out at a high school, socially distanced, as we've seen some of these pro days.